Over the course of this investigation, we made numerous findings that shocked us, not least of which the apparent role that former CIA Director John Brennan played in helping bring the 9/11 hijackers to the United States.
Is it cock-up, or do you think there is merit to suggestion that some people somewhere must have known more than we've been told?
Well, we know that people did know more than we've been told. There was a team of clearly intel-connected foreigners who were arrested after 9/11, as you well know. The official story on 9/11 is a complete lie. The 9/11 report is a joke.
You have the CIA following two men all over the planet, and then eventually even to America, right? And you don't tell the FBI. 9/11 Commission, the cover-up.
So what did happen? What did the government know? What did foreign governments know? There was a cover-up. Why? It's been nearly 25 years. It is time Americans learned what actually happened. We're going to tell you, we're releasing one episode per week. You're not going to want to wait. If you're a member, you don't have to. You get all 5 episodes the day it drops, right then, ad-free. Our first episode airs Thursday, 9/11, September 11th. You will not want to miss it. Join us now at tuckercarlson.com.
All right, well, that trailer and this docu-series that's coming up on the Tucker Carlson Network is getting a lot of attention. So much so that Piers Morgan interviewed him today just to ask some questions and to challenge what many believe are simply crazy conspiracy theories among conspiracy theorists in regard to what took place on 9/11. I don't know what I personally believe. Obviously, this hasn't been published yet, but I thought that this conversation, this exchange between Piers Morgan and Tucker Carlson was fascinating. And we're gonna just give you a few highlights. Please watch the entire conversation for yourselves. But before I get into it, Cenk, any initial thoughts?
Well, before I never entertained the idea that 9/11 was anything but what the government said. And so I was like, what did they make the planes disappear? They get willing to kill everybody on the planes. It all sounds absurd. So I now think that I have seen the government do so many terrible things repeatedly and cover up for it repeatedly that I am no longer sure. And when you see things like World Trade Center 7, a building across the street, apparently was so hot that the steel inside the building melted from across the street. But the government found Mohammed Atta's paper passport conveniently on top of the rubble.
Yeah, there's
things that don't make any sense.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying I know the answer, but I'm beginning to come to some conclusions about what is not the answer.
Yeah, and that's where I'm at as well, right? I'm not running around saying 9/11 was an inside job. I don't know, but I do know that there are some serious issues with what the accepted narrative is. And in fact, they're about to get into an exchange in regard to Building 7. So let's go to the first clip.
Huge parts of the 9/11 story were left out of the commission report. For example, what happened to Building 7, which was not only not next to the Twin Towers, which were hit by airplanes, but had a building in between itself and those buildings, collapsed that afternoon for reasons that no one has been able to explain since. You're not a lunatic for asking. There's no plausible explanation for how that building collapsed.
So that's the issue at play here, that I wanted to give you that portion of what Tucker Carlson had to say. And Piers Morgan attempts to explain it to some extent by providing what he feels is a similar example of another building, like just melting away similarly to Building 7. Yeah.
Before we go to that clip, Anna, I just want to say this story broke today. I didn't know that was going to be the first topic. And for all the times that I had this conversation with Ben and a million other people, I would always say, look guys, I get everything and I'm not a physicist. I don't know how the plane could hit or couldn't hit or could crash or couldn't crash. I got no expertise on that. Just that building that is not anywhere near the other buildings just melting down. I've never thought that made any sense. And what we should expect from our government is logical answers.
Right.
Not like, whatever, shut up, you're a conspiracy theorist and you should never get any real answers. So the reason I interrupted you is because I'm super curious what Piers Morgan is gonna say, because I've literally never heard a proper explanation for it, even when I believe 9/11 100%.
Well, let's go
the
to
official
Piers Morgan.
story.
Let's see what he had to say.
if you look into the investigation into Tower 7, the findings of the investigation into it were that the North Tower, when it came down, had set off a load of fires in Building 7. And it was a steel structure and shouldn't have gone down, but it did. That these fires burned all afternoon, and I think it was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon or something, the tower eventually gave way to the welter of fires raging inside it. And it was the only time that had happened to a structure that was built in that way. However, there has been another tower very similar to that in structure, which has since gone down in Tehran. So it's no longer the only one. In other words, there is another example of a tower like that collapsing.
Okay, so you can see Tucker Carlson smiling in response to what Piers Morgan is saying, probably because, okay, well, if you want to make that argument that the fire was so hot that it led to the collapse of Building 7, well, what happened to the building in between, right? And nothing happened to that building. And so I want to give Tucker an opportunity to respond to that, and then we can discuss.
What is the alternative explanation? I mean, if you're examining another theory other than the one that the investigation concluded was simply that the North Tower came down, fires were set off in Tower 7, and then it eventually collapsed. What is the other theory which we should give more credence to?
I don't know. I don't know that the onus is on me or anyone who seeks the truth about what happened to come up with an alternative theory. The onus is on federal authorities to explain why, for example, they never investigated it. Why, for example, the rubble and the steel from that building was carted off within hours and sent out of the country to Asia. Why, for example, an analysis done not by kooks, but by chemists found traces of explosive material in the dust from that day. Why structural engineers who have kind of no skin in this game came to the conclusion that that just couldn't happen based on all available evidence. And that none of that is addressed at all or even mentioned in the 9/11 report. So, and there are all kinds of anomalies, as I know that you're fully aware, and there are possible explanations to explain all of them. For example, the BBC report on air saying the building had fallen when it hadn't fallen yet.
He's right about that BBC report, and Pierce later says that the BBC report was based on an erroneous report by Reuters. Okay,
that doesn't explain anything. Then how did Reuters know the building was going to collapse before it got hit?
Exactly, yeah.
So look, I don't know those
details. We don't know,
Okay.
and like I'm very interested to watch this docuseries and the claims that it makes. I was super young when 9/11 happened. I was in high school, and the thought of this being a big conspiracy was ridiculous to me. It didn't even cross my mind. I was a child, okay? But revisiting this now, I do have a lot of questions.
Yeah, no, it's over. Look, we're at a seminal moment in American politics and media. Before, there was a whole bucket of things you could not question. The minute you question them, what would happen? Wow, well, what does that mean you can't question them? You can say anything you want in a backyard barbecue, right? But if you work in politics or media in any way, shape, or form, if you question them, you would immediately be fired. You would be labeled a kook, a conspiracy theorist, and probably some sort of character assassination on top attached to it.
Right.
Anti-Semite, a racist, a this, a that, whatever it is, but you're dispatched. You're not allowed on air, right? Now, because of digital media, they can't contain it. And now everybody's asking questions and they're like, fire Tim Dillon. Damn it, we can't fire Tim Dillon. Okay, then fire Joe Rogan. God damn it, we can't fire Joe Rogan. So now people are starting to ask and ask and ask. And so what I'm telling you now about this seminal moment is we've crossed the Rubicon. You can ask any goddamn thing you like,
right?
Okay, and if they try to fire you for it, they're the bad guys, not you.
And asking the question doesn't mean that you already think that it's a conspiracy. You're just trying to prove that it's a conspiracy. The questions about Building 7 are legitimate questions, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, look, I'm willing to get convinced on anything. But Building 7 is a mystery that is nearly impossible. Like the idea that the towers would collapse themselves, north and south, after they got hit, that the steel could burn so much that they could collapse is a very controversial idea within engineering circles, right? But but a building across the street with other buildings in between, no, the steel didn't burn down. No way. That is not the correct answer. So the same thing with JFK. So when I was growing up, if you ever said anything about JFK, you were told to shut up and you'd get fired, etc. Now, I don't know who killed JFK because I don't have the secret files in front of me. I don't know what happened on 9/11, but it's not my job to know. It's my job to ask questions, right? And it's the job of the government to tell us the correct answers. So what I'm telling you now is, on JFK, I'm absolutely positive the government story is not the correct answer. Lee Harvey Oswald didn't shoot him from 3 states away and hit everything else in between and is the greatest shot of all time, even though he had nothing to do with JFK. There's tons and tons of people who despise JFK and wanted him killed and said on the record they wanted him killed. So I don't know which one of them did it. I do know that it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald acting by himself. And if you want to do the old games and say, well, the government said it, so you're a conspiracy theorist. You can do that all day long, guys, but it doesn't matter because you lost. Because now you look ridiculous. So now when you turn back to 9/11, no, I don't know the answer, guys. I don't know who did it and why they did it, or maybe it did happen just like October 7th, where it's not that Israel did it, but there was a weird stand down order. Why was there a stand down order? And that's not me saying, that's IDF soldiers saying there was a stand down order right at that exact time when we never have a stand down order. So that's not me saying Israel did it, that's me saying that's weird.
That is weird,
right?
And we need an answer to that.
Yeah, and you need a plausible answer to that, not trust me, bro, which is what the government's been doing the entire time. And then one more quick thing on Pierce's answer. So now we're told that conveniently, there was a building that melted down in a similar way in Tehran. Wait, does Iran acknowledge that? Or is that some intelligence we got from a trusted ally? And just trust us, bro, that building went down just like World Trade Center 7 did. Yeah, maybe and maybe not.
Should we play a few more clips?
Yeah.
Okay, so the topic then switched to whether anyone may have known that this terror attack was gonna happen, but withheld that information or that intel from the American people and the American government anyway. Let's get to that clip.
Is it cock up, or do you think there is merit to suggestion that some people somewhere must have known more than we've been told?
Well, we know that people did know more than we've been told. I mean, somebody shorted the airlines and a bunch of the banks that were affected. Now, this is not a conspiracy theory, it's not a guess. This is publicly available information. Now, the FBI found out the identity of the person or institution that shorted these events on 9/11 and made a huge amount of money by doing that, but never released that information. So why can't we know who clearly had foreknowledge? I mean, if you're shorting American Airlines a week before 9/11, when no one knows it's coming, I think you should have to explain why you did that. And if you're shorting Barclays and banks that were affected by 9/11, why can't we know who you are? These are public markets, by the way. This is not private equity, this is publicly traded equities.
That's fascinating. I mean, there could be an explanation for why that individual decided to short American Airlines. It could have been a crazy coincidence.
Yeah. So look, again, the problem isn't the answers, the problem is that we weren't allowed to ask before. Right? So for example, is it possible that somebody had a different hunch based on a completely different thing and they shorted American and they got quote unquote lucky, right? In that sense. Now you could say that with rolling your eyes, oh yeah, what a coincidence. But it might be, it might be, right? It depends on the scale of it, it depends on who it is. Is it Rando Bob from Nebraska? Well, how the hell would he know, right? But if it's somebody from the intelligence community, whoa, wait, that's a different thing, right? If it's a senator, that's a different thing, right? So why aren't the American people allowed to know? I mean, you don't even have to give me the brother's name, whether it was the guy who shorted Barclays or the company that did, or American or whatever. Just like, can we find out what category they were in? Were they a farmer? Were they a banker? What were they, right? But for everything, they always tell you the same thing. Shut up, otherwise we'll ruin you. You will assassinate your character and say you're a conspiracy theorist and you'll never work again. That reaction makes me think, wait, maybe this is worse than I thought. Because what a weirdo reaction for the most normal questions about one of the most important events in American history.
It is one of the most important and most tragic events in American history. It was the largest terror attack on US soil. Okay, thousands of people died, and it served as the catalyst for changing this country forever. and not for the best, I would argue, okay? Violations of Americans' privacies, mass surveillance, the Patriot Act, obviously, foreign wars, it just goes on.
Global war on terrorism that cost us $8 trillion.
Yes.
Happened to take out other people's enemies, not our enemies. Anyways, but one other thing, the bin Ladens. So why did we fly out the bin Ladens? No one's ever answered that.
That's a great question.
So that was a question from the left. That was Michael Moore asking that question. What a weird reaction. You're telling me Osama bin Laden did it, and your first reaction was to gather up all the bin Ladens that apparently lived inside America and fly them out first class to Saudi Arabia.
Why?
And I'm not allowed to ask why? No, that's crazy talk. Guys, this isn't about right or left. This is about our government doesn't represent us, and they keep telling us funny stories that don't make any sense. The minute you ask one question, they try to take your head off.
Yeah.
So you got one more?
One more clip. Let's take a look.
So clearly, yes, there was foreknowledge. By the way, there was a team, this is according to the FBI, by the way, this is the FBI saying, there was a team of clearly intel-connected foreigners who were arrested after 9/11, as you well know, videotaping the terror attacks. I'm almost verbatim quoting from the FBI assessment of this. And the FBI determined that they apparently had foreknowledge of the attacks. So why can't we know more about that? Exactly. Shut up. That's bigoted. No, this is my country.
So I don't know if he's referring to the 5 Israelis who a witness had seen taking photos, not recording, but taking photos of the World Trade Center as it was being attacked. One of them was holding a lighter up to the World Trade Center prior to the attack. And I don't know if that's what he's referring to, but those 5 individuals were kept in US custody for over 2 months. The FBI absolutely did believe that at least 2 of them had connections to Mossad, right? The Israeli intelligence organization. And I read the FBI files on this, and the investigation just like abruptly kind of ended after a little over 2 months. John Ashcroft specifically, the attorney general at the time, called for them to be released and sent back to Israel. And then a few years after that, he served as a consultant who consulted on behalf of Israel.
I mean, it's absurd. So guys, look, on that one, again, that's the one that people get most touchy about because they assume all sorts of things in your head that aren't in your head. They're like, oh, that must mean that you hate Israel and you hate Jews and you hate this. No, hold on, guys. We're not talking about any of that. We're saying, why did they go to document that event? And that's not my words, that's their words. One of them was on Israeli TV afterwards when he was shipped back to Israel, and they said, why did you go? And he slipped up. I assume he slipped up. He said, we went to document the event, which makes you ask, how did you know there was going to be an event? So now you're not supposed to ask that question, otherwise you're gonna get called all sorts of names.
And by the way, there could even be a legitimate explanation for that, right? Maybe they happened to be in New York City at the time doing other spy operations. The claim was that, or the FBI also believed that there were Israeli nationals or members or agents of Mossad here in the United States spying on Arabs. Okay, that's the
on Arabs.
On Arabs, okay.
Okay, that's what they say.
Maybe they just happen to be in New York City.
Is that okay, by the way?
I don't think that's okay, especially if our government and our intelligence organizations don't know about it. But okay, putting that aside for a second, maybe they saw that there was an attack and they went to this specific area to take more images and whatever of the World Trade Center. I don't know what the explanation is. But the point is, these questions are okay to ask, especially when the moving company that these 5 Israelis were working for ended up being a total front. And the owner of that moving company immediately scrambled to get back to Israel once the 5 individuals had been arrested. And by the way, in the moving truck, they found foreign passports, $4,700 in cash, all sorts of weird, shady things that make you wonder, make you ask these appropriate questions. And remember, the 5 got arrested after a witness saw them taking the photos of the World Trade Center and also, in her words, celebrating. They looked happy.
Yeah. All right, so guys, last thing on this. Again, it doesn't mean that Israel did it, for example. It could be that they knew about it, like on October 7th, but chose not to say anything. It could be that they said something, but we didn't listen to them. Okay, that could also be the case.
Right.
Remember, there was the famous CIA warning to Bush when he was on his Crawford Ranch, and they said Bin Laden determined to attack inside the United States, and Bush said, "You covered your ass, now go home," and ignored it.
Right.
So there could be legitimate things, but what if you have a legitimate answer? Telling everybody to shut up and calling them bigots is a weird response, right? And then final thought here. Now, no one disputes that they were Israeli spies and that they were released back to Israel, right?
People do dispute it even till this day, but.
Oh, I mean, of course, the Israeli government's gonna lie about everything. So I don't mean like illegitimate, ridiculous things like there is no genocide in Gaza, no one got hurt in Gaza. I mean, you could say absurd things, right? But like, we know there was Israeli spies, ABC News reported it, Fox News reported it at the time, etc. The FBI in its own reports has the Israeli spies, right? And then they send them back to Israel, just like we did with the Bin Laden. Why would you catch spies of any nation, let alone after the worst attack against your country ever, and then let them go? Why would you let them go? Like assuming that Israel had absolutely nothing to do with it and no foreknowledge, no nothing, because we don't know that. But you did catch these Israeli spies. They did say they're there to document the event. Maybe they did. They said that later. So, but it is weird. They were taking pictures of it. You thought to question them for 2 months. That's how freaked out you were by it. And then all of a sudden, you don't just go, "Oh, okay, I get it. It was a miscommunication or whatever. You guys didn't do anything wrong." You then say, even though I know you're a spy for a foreign country and you were spying on us here in America, you're free to go. Why are they free to go? Forget 9/11, we caught spies here. Yeah. Why are they free to go? Why were the Bin Ladens free to go? Why were the Israeli spies free to go? That is not an illegitimate question. It doesn't get any more legitimate than that question. And if you can't answer that, the problem isn't in the person asking the question. The problem isn't the person that won't give the answer to the American people.
Anyone who doubts the official narrative is cast as a kook, a criminal, a fringe conspiracy theorist, and punished. They've been blacklisted and censored and banned. Even as the leaders who failed to protect our country on 9/11 use these attacks as a pretense to expand their own powers and permanently transform the United States. Over the course of this investigation, we made numerous findings that shocked us, not least of which the apparent role that former CIA Director John Brennan played in helping bring the 9/11 hijackers to the United States, and the remarkable lengths the CIA went to protect the 9/11 hijackers from the FBI.
You had a duty to protect Americans, and you failed because of your fantastical delusion that you could recruit somebody inside the cell.
Tucker Carlson has published the first episode of his 9/11 docuseries, and it is definitely worth watching. Now, the first episode has to do with the CIA's intelligence gathering operation, the lack of communication with the FBI in regard to this operation, and the fact that there were literally 9/11 hijackers in the country that the CIA knew about, and in fact facilitated the travel to the United States. So I didn't know about that until watching this first episode. And I think it was informative. It was backed up by documentation that was provided by Tucker Carlson. Definitely watch it for yourself. I'm gonna summarize it here though. Now, according to a description of the episode, rather than inform the FBI, the CIA tried to recruit 2 of the hijackers for a false flag operation, which quickly spiraled out of control. So that's in the description of the YouTube video. So that's a pretty bold claim. We have to admit it's a bold claim, and I was skeptical of it before watching the episode. But he interviewed someone by the name of Mark Rossini, okay? And Mark Rossini, everything he had to say had corroborating documentation that was shared in the episode, and that changed my mind. So before we get into the details, a little more about who Mark Rossini is. So he was an FBI agent from January 1999 to May of 2003. And he worked as the FBI's New York Joint Terrorism Task Force representative at the Alex Station at CIA headquarters. Now, the Alex station was very specific. It was known as the Bin Laden unit, okay? So the Bin Laden issue station was like a dedicated unit within the CIA that operated from 1996 to 2005. And its sole role, its sole purpose was to track and monitor Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, the perpetrators of 9/11. Now, Rossini claims that the FBI did not know that the CIA was allegedly recruiting 9/11 hijackers as informants so they could learn more about Al-Qaeda. And they even approved visas that essentially allowed for these hijackers to travel to the United States, okay? So let's talk a little bit more about this CIA operation, little background on it. Beginning in 1996, the CIA and NSA had been spying on Al-Qaeda through something known as the Hada home in Sana'a, Yemen. So the Hada home is a really important thing to keep in mind here. The FBI nor Mark Rossini were informed about the communications hub for Al-Qaeda that the CIA had discovered and was spying in on. So the Hada home is where they would gather Al-Qaeda terrorists or affiliates of Al-Qaeda. They'd gather there, and the CIA knew about it, and so they were spying in on the Hada home. Okay, so the Hada home was also the physical home of the father-in-law to Khalid al-Mihdhar, who was one of the 9/11 hijackers. Now, at this time, okay, before 9/11 happened, obviously, there was this summit that was to take place. While spying in on the Hada home, the CIA and the NSA learned about a summit that Al-Qaeda affiliated terrorists were planning to have in Malaysia. So Kuala Lumpur is where they were gonna have this summit. Now, one of the 9/11 hijackers, Khalid al-Mihdhar, basically planned to attend by flying from Yemen to Dubai to Malaysia. Malaysia, again, is where they're gonna have the summit. And at this point, the CIA basically intercepts al-Mihdhar once he arrives in Dubai, and they collect a valuable piece of evidence through a search of his hotel room. You're about to hear more about that piece of evidence through Mark Rossini. He's about to explain what that was.
They arranged to search his room and go in. And when they go in, his passport is there, and they take pictures of it and photocopy it. And they send back the imagery. And lo and behold, in his passport is a visa to go to the United States of America, issued out of the American consulate in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia.
According to one recently released court filings, quote, the visas were issued to facilitate an operation run by the Saudis and the CIA spying operation. The station chief in Riyadh at the time was future CIA Director John Brennan. The CIA continued tracking al-Mihdhar to Kuala Lumpur, where he met up with other al-Qaeda associates, including Nawaf al-Hazmi, a second future 9/11 hijacker.
So get a load of this. The 9/11 hijackers, there's two of them, were able to get visas from the United States approved by the US consulate in Saudi Arabia. And that's the consulate that was run by John Brennan. So that is an important piece of information that I had heard rumors about it. I hadn't seen anyone provide any hard evidence of it, so I didn't believe it. But the documentation clearly, lays it out. You have Mark Rossini clearly laying it out. And so the way that these hijackers were able to come to the United States legally was through a visa that was provided by the US consulate in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. Okay. So here we learned that 9/11 hijacker al-Mihdhar's passport has a visa to come to the US and that it was issued by that US consulate. Then the CIA headquarters in Kuala Lumpur spied in on the Malaysia summit, where you have these Al-Qaeda affiliated terrorists attending, and reported back to the Alex station in the United States, where Mark Rossini was operating out of. Now, Rossini's FBI colleague, a guy by the name of Doug Miller, approaches him about the CIA cable, because they received that cable from the CIA. That's good. You want that to happen. And tells Rossini that they need to inform the FBI bureau about it, right? They need to let the FBI bureau know that this US Saudi intelligence operation is taking place. Rossini agrees. How could he not? Now, Doug Miller writes what's known as a CIR. That's a Central Intelligence Report, and Rossini approves it, and he's ready to send it over. It goes to the desk of CIA analyst Michael Ann Casey. And here's what happens next, according to Rossini.
And it sits in her queue, her electronic queue, and it doesn't move for like a day or two. It should move in hours. I'll never forget, like it was yesterday. Never forget. I standing over her, I said, "Hey, Doug's CIR. She got to go to the FBI." He said, "No, it's not." I said, "Well, why not?" She said, "Because it's not FBI, not an FBI matter." What do you mean it's an FBI matter? She said, "It's a CIA matter, and when and if we want the FBI to know, we will tell them, and you are not to say anything." I said, but they got a visa to come to the US. She said, "No, we're handling it, and when we want to tell the FBI, we will." Now, in my naivete, I believed her. And I have to live with that every day of my life, that I believed her.
I can't imagine living with that kind of guilt, but clearly Rossini feels a lot of guilt over the fact that he followed orders and did what the CIA told him to do. So the CIA blocked the FBI detail at Alex Station, Rossini, from informing the FBI bureau, which is pretty insane, but okay. Then two of the 9/11 hijackers make their way to the United States. Take a look.
On January 8th, 2000, CIA surveillance teams reported that Al-Midhar had boarded a flight to Bangkok, Thailand. He was accompanied by a man they identified as Al-Hazmi. According to the official account, this is where the trail went cold. The CIA placed their names on a watch list and asked that Thai authorities track their movements. 3 months later, the Thai government reported back. Al-Hazmi had boarded a United Airlines flight to Los Angeles. Al-Midhar was with him. The two hijackers had arrived in the United States.
You have the CIA then following one man and then two men all over the planet, and then eventually even to America, right? Landing in Los Angeles, California, and you don't tell the FBI.
Guys, that's insane. That really is insane. Because think about it, the FBI investigates issues within the borders of the United States. The FBI should know about it. So why the hell would the CIA try to block the FBI bureau from learning about this CIA operation, learning about the fact that Al-Qaeda terrorists were being allowed into the United States, okay? Wouldn't it be helpful considering that Al-Qaeda operatives would be here on domestic soil and the FBI is tasked with investigating and spying on potential terrorists and criminals within US borders? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. Well, you're about to hear from former White House counterterrorism czar Richard Clarke on what he was told in a newly released document. Take a look.
According to a recently released court filing, former White House counterterrorism czar Richard Clarke told government investigators that the, quote, CIA was running a false flag operation to recruit the hijackers.
When Cofer Black became the head of the counterterrorism center at CIA, he was aghast that they had no sources in Al-Qaeda.
After Clarke made that claim publicly, he received an angry call from former director of the CIA, George Tenet, who did not deny the allegations made by Mr. Clarke, end quote. But when we reached out to Tenet, his spokesperson denied that the CIA was recruiting hijackers, calling it false rumors and saying, quote, that's categorically not true. He also recalled that the executive director of the 9/11 Commission, Philip Zelikow, blocked the commission's investigation into the matter at the behest of Condoleezza Rice.
Okay, that's amazing. So you have George Tenet throwing Condoleezza Rice under the bus. But to be sure, the 9/11 Commission's report does not include anything about this clandestine CIA intelligence gathering operation. So again, to recap, the CIA director, George Tenet, excoriated Clarke that's the counterterrorism czar, for disclosing what he was told about the CIA intelligence gathering operation, but he did not deny it in the email that he sent to Clark. This would be something that the 9/11 Commission would want to investigate, right? But the commission's director, Philip Zelikow, blocked the investigation into this, according to Tenet, at the behest of then Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. So as a result, the official 9/11 report from the 9/11 Commission does not even mention the CIA's plan to recruit the hijackers as CIA informants into Al-Qaeda. So we don't even know who, so we don't even know who that person is, by the way. Okay, so the CIA blocked the commission from investigating the CIA operative who was attempting to recruit the hijackers. We don't know who that CIA operative is because in all the documentation, that person is simply referred to as VVV. So that person's name is redacted. And one of the arguments that Tucker Carlson makes is we should have some transparency and we should know more details about who the CIA operative was because this seems like a pretty big deal. And we just, at this moment, don't know. The commission's investigators also did not ask CIA Director George Tenet about the Al-Qaeda summit in Malaysia or why the CIA blocked the FBI from being warned about what they were doing about this whole operation, the fact that there were 2 Al-Qaeda terrorists in the United States with the CIA's help and acknowledgement. So hijackers in the US, let's talk about them a little more. So while in the US, the 9/11 hijackers, that's Al-Hazmi and Al-Midar, lived in plain sight, as Tucker Carlson says in this episode, because they didn't hide their real names. They were living out in the open using their actual names. They were even listed in the San Diego phone book. They lived in San Diego for more than a year before the 9/11 attacks even happened. Also, when they arrived to the US, they met up with a Saudi man by the name of Omar al-Bayoumi at a cafe in Los Angeles. So the CIA was using al-Bayoumi to spy for them and gather intelligence on the hijackers because again, at the time, the CIA was not allowed to engage in domestic spying. So they essentially used this Saudi as their proxy to do the spying for them. And here's a little more about this Omar al-Bayoumi guy.
Bayoumi's notebook, which was uncovered when British law enforcement raided his home in the UK, contained a drawing of an airplane and mathematical calculations related to flying it. The 9/11 Commission investigators never saw this. At the time, al-Bayoumi had a no-show job at a Saudi aviation contractor called Avco. The company's employees say he was one of roughly 50 ghost employees working there at the time, taking the paycheck but never coming to work. According to declassified government documents, an investigator from the 9/11 Commission said al-Bayoumi was receiving substantial sums of money from the Saudi embassy in Washington prior to the 9/11 attacks, that the money was being funneled from accounts at Riggs Bank in Georgetown belonging to Haifa bin Faisal, the wife of the Saudi ambassador to the United States. By using the Saudis as a proxy to recruit the 9/11 hijackers, the CIA gave itself cover. If things went wrong, they could push a narrative that blamed the Saudi government for the attacks, which is what they did.
Now, in addition to that, al-Bayoumi convinced the hijackers to move to San Diego. He co-signed on a lease to an apartment for them. He even paid their first month's rent and security deposit. He got them bank accounts, driver's licenses, and introduced them to other radical Muslims in the area, including Anwar al-Awlaki, who later was assassinated in a drone strike by the Obama administration, even though he was a US citizen and had the right to due process, but nonetheless, he was killed. Just really interesting stuff. So at one point, al-Midar was able to exit and re-enter the United States because he was issued a multi-visit visa by the US consulate. So he traveled to Yemen to see the birth of his daughter, I believe. Birth of a child, I can't remember if it was a daughter or not, but nonetheless, just a few days before he re-entered the United States though, and he re-entered through JFK in New York, the FBI and CIA had actually met to discuss the bombing of USS Cole, which al-Madar was actually involved in. So the bombing of that military ship killed 17 US soldiers. The FBI had a picture of al-Madar that was taken at the summit in Malaysia. The agent asked the CIA if they knew who the man was, and the CIA refused to tell him. That's crazy. Or tell them, I should say. So it wouldn't be until August of 2001 that the CIA finally alerted the FBI about what was going on. But by that point, it was too late. Obviously, soon after that, September 11th happened. And so the theory is that the CIA operation spun out of control. However, the FBI had its own failures. The theory is that the CIA operation had spun out of control. But the FBI also, I want to be clear, had their own failures. So take a look at this. What you're looking at, when al-Hazmi and al-Madar were in California, they spent some time living with an FBI informant by the name of Abdu Sattar. Now, Carlson claims that somehow the FBI was never informed about this. Okay, so like there was definitely a breakdown in communication in some cases, but most of the time, my read of what was disclosed in this first episode was that the CIA was engaged in an operation that they were very much intentionally hiding from the FBI. And as a result of giving these two al-Qaeda terrorists access to the United States with these visas, the ability to travel to the US, this was all an attempt to gather information, to use them as informants and gather information about al-Qaeda. Obviously, that operation has backfired. But there's still so much that we don't know because there are documents that are being withheld from the American people, even though 9/11 happened 24 years ago. And at this point, I think we're deserving of a little more transparency and a little more clarity of how the largest terror attack on US soil was able to occur. Considering the fact that we have 1 billion intelligence agencies, you have all this, surveillance in America. So I thought that this was definitely an enlightening episode, to say the least. And there's more detail that you should look into. I can't get into every single minor detail that was covered in this episode, but I thought that this was telling. And I think that the CIA has a lot to answer for. Now, as it pertains to the 9/11 Commission, it was pretty much set up to fail. It was underfunded. And as you can tell, they were kind of led astray in that they weren't given all the information they needed from our own intelligence organizations. But it was an eye opener, and I recommend taking a look at it. I'm not saying that the United States intentionally planned a terror attack in the US and it was an inside job in that way. I'm just saying that there were some pretty big missteps and some really bad ideas carried out by the CIA, as it appears. And we haven't really gotten many answers about why this happened and why no one was held accountable for it. So take a look at the episode for yourselves. That's all I have to say about it. There are going to be several more episodes coming out in subsequent weeks, and I'll decide whether we cover every single one. But I thought this one contained some information that was worth knowing about.